All right. So yeah, I'm here to talk about ES6 Harmony, which is, well, let me introduce myself first. I'm Julio, the D is mute, and I'm a freelance developer designer, and I'm probably the grumpy cat of front-end development, and mostly because, you know, I have a pretty conservative approach to doing this thing, and I'm not a JavaScript guy by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I use a lot of JavaScript, but I also use CSS, HTML, and other things. So I am here to talk about a programming language, and fortunately for me, I have a background in other things. Like I actually started off with C and Perl, and then I went to Ruby and some other things, and then eventually JavaScript. So yeah, anyway, ES6 is where JavaScript is heading to. So for better or worse, I think there's some good and some bad there. And this is mostly a whirlwind tour of the better parts, in my opinion, which is just the stuff that I think is, you know, cooler. There's a lot of moving parts still in the spec. There's a lot of stuff that it's still being redone, like proxies just got replaced recently, or maybe not that recently, but it did get replaced. So this is very much Daredevil territory. Let's just start from yeah, one a bit. Ultimately, these things are just here to help us write better code. You know, I like what it fixes about JavaScript, but I'm pretty sure people are going to screw this up too. And what I mean is that I think one of the good parts of JavaScript is the fact that it is simple enough. And it's not that I think it could improve, but I think adding a lot of stuff on top of JavaScript that's framework-like, it just doesn't help it. I'll get to that, but for now, that's my general stance on the whole matter. So one of the things that ES6 introduces is classes, and classes as in proper classes. You know, there were a bunch of discussions about how it should work until eventually, in the spec at least, it tells a short story of how somebody emailed and said, how about we just agree on the simplest possible implementation of classes that could work and go for that, and you know, just have something that's extensive enough that if in the future we decide to change, then it's changeable. All right, so funny enough, they just went for very much what CoffeeScript does. And yeah, so this is how it looks like. Can you guys see back there? Are you okay? I mean, I think so, right? So I mean, currently, if you want to use, say, classes as an inheritance in JavaScript, you have to use like prototypes like that, and you know, classes are actually functions. So in the new ES6, you're going to actually write the same thing here like this. It's going to be class person, and then the methods, like say talk, like person prototype task, is going to look like this. So it's going to be talk words, and then console.log words, right? So this is obviously more succinct, and it's more desirable, I find too. I mean, they sadly didn't get rid of the brackets, but you know, it's already progress. I mean, we have classes that, you know, talk like classes, like read like classes like that, and we have shorthand method declarations for classes. So everything else you declare, it would go here. So something else would go here too, shorthand like that. So you know, classes in ES6 also, they have the whole shebang of super, of being able to call stuff like, you know, so if you want to override in the next class, let's just say class throw extends person. Probably not, right? But yeah. So to talk would be something like, yeah, talk. And then words, you would be probably like, well, we would probably be overriding this. I mean, super, right? That's pretty much calls this now. But we could just say console log, and then, yeah, sure, but, and then super, right? Which is what every troll does. So they apparently agree with you, but not really. So, all right. So that's the super implementation. That's how you extend classes in ES6, which is pretty cool. I mean, think about it. Right now, you pretty much have to copy, if you're using just raw JavaScript and not CoffeeScript. If you want to inherit the class from the other, there are some libraries out there that do that through like simplifying things, but essentially you have to copy one's prototype to the other, right, which is like crazy. Anyway, so language design-wise, this is much better now than, it's a major step forward. There are a few other details to class, but generally that's how it's going to work. Method parameter stuff. So now, the same stuff that you had in every language from 1980s or so, it's now in JavaScript. How cool is that? So now we have default values for functions and REST arguments. So we can now go, say, words. We can just put a value here that says blah, blah. And then we can just go console. Well, we're overriding our troll, right? We shouldn't. Let's just override the person and say words, and then console log words. So now if I don't say anything, if you basically go p var p new person, yeah, let's be correct. And then you go p.talk, that's gonna output, words like that. So there's something that I actually meant to use for this presentation, which is a pretty cool bookmarklet, which is, yeah, I'm not connected, so I'm not even going to try that. There are some sandboxes around the web, which is stuff that you can just paste ES6 code to, and you can just evaluate pretty much like a browser console, and you can test your ES6, right? Which actually brings me to the point, I pretty much have found one other project, which is called Grunt Tracer. It sounds like a French word, I'm not sure. But it's a project for transpiling from ES6 to JavaScript. And I think aside from probably the smart among you already heard about ES6, and the smarter probably even tried to actually use one of these transpilers. But the genius among you probably did all that and then proceeded to ignore this whole thing because, seriously, until we can actually write programs on our day-to-day basis, caring too much about this is pointless, mostly because, as I said, it's a moving spec anyway. So, yeah, REST arguments is pretty much like, so talk words, but you may actually, it wouldn't fit here. So, stuff, doing stuff, and you would go more important thing first, and then the rest, right? So, this pretty much works inverse to what CoffeeScript already has that, and yeah, they actually use something like this. And I'm actually going to make a lot of CoffeeScript references here, but because I think you guys may be familiar with. They just inverted the order of the dots, but it pretty much says everything you pass to doing stuff. So like person dot doing stuff. And then you can go, say, clean my bedroom as the most important thing, and then everything else I pass, like walk the dog, walk the dog, etc. Pretty much the rest variable in here is going to contain everything except the first parameter, right? It's just basic language stuff. It's stuff that even in Perl, that back in like Perl 5 or 4, so you already had that. Anyway, so destructuring, which is another different feature of ES6, which is, it's already there in Node.js to an extent, and you can just use curly brackets to extract object properties from objects. And that's actually going to land in ES6. I like to think of it as the process of pulling variables out of things without pain in the ass, right? So you have something like, you have now things that return arrays like this. Let me just clean up my slate and go. So let's say you have returns array function blah, and this returns 1 and 2. And you can now go for A, B gets returns array. So what did this do? What now works is that this returns an array, right? But the value of A is going to be 1, the value of B is going to be 2. So it just destructures whatever structure is being returned by something and then puts inside variable. So it's maybe handy actually for assigning stuff quickly. It also can like returns, say returns book, function details. And then it goes, let's say, yeah, return, say, title, book, description, blah. And then you can actually go var, say, title description gets returns book. Right. So what I did is I destructured the book object into the variables I want. Like, if the people among you who actually use Node, you may be familiar with, in Node you can do stuff like, say, var, when you recurring underscore, say underscore.js for using the backend. So if you're doing that, you can go something like var, say, extend require. Oh yeah, I'm not meant to use CoffeeScript. There you go. So now what I did is now extend is going to be declared. I pulled basically the extend method out of underscore, right, with that. That's already in Node. That's the same sort of thing you're going to get in ES6 now. And so finally, a decent for loop. So, you know, JavaScript probably had the worst design for loop ever. You know, and it was just a very poor design decision, in my opinion. I think even if you just return the value and not the index, it would be more useful than the other way around, which is the status quo. And currently now you're going to have a decent for loop. So I mean, the for loops in JavaScript in ES6, they basically go, you can actually do a for off things. So you can go for var fruit of fruit lists. And then you can go console.log fruit, right? Which is a basic iterator, right? So this is a sane for loop, whereas now in JavaScript you have to go for var I equals 0, while I, well, a fruit list length, I++, and then you go console.log fruit list. Like that, which is nuts, right? But we've been doing this for a long time, so nobody minds too much now, but it's pretty much how it's working, and now it's going to become this. I mean, we'll still have this sort of for loop here. It's still going to be there, but we're going to have a decent one this time. But the way that these things work in ES6 is that objects or, you know, things, primitives now, they have a property called an iterator, which is actually, they define how a given structure is going to iterate. So by default, arrays get an iterator that the for loop can use like that, and it just works. And you would expect that somebody redesigning the language at this point in time would go, wow, probably if I want to iterate through an object, now I can go something like, oh, for var, say, name key of my object, and I can go console.log, and then name key, right? I mean, you would think that would work like that, but it won't. You're going to have to declare an iterator for my object, which is basically a function that's going to define how this object should be iterated on. And that's because, oh, we don't want to conflict with, say, future propositions about iterating on objects. Like, but yeah, you know, we have to live with that shit. So what else? I mean, modules probably, in my personal opinion, one of the biggest deals about ES6. There's an excellent post by Isaac from Node.js that he wrote that he doesn't quite like it, mostly because some of the features that modules now do is like you're allowed to nest modules. Let me just show how modules work. So modules are very much the module keyword like that, say module fruit, and then you go, say, export all fruits, get, and then apple, banana, it's a banana, right? And then you can go export, make a smoothie, which is a function, right? And so on. So that's how it's going to work. So, and then here where's the kicker comes. So let's just forget loading these modules for a bit, because loading things, in my opinion, and I think Isaac also shares that opinion, it should be up to the host, as in it shouldn't belong in the JavaScript implementation. It should be, say, in the browser as a browser feature. So because JavaScript exists in Node too. So let's just say you would go import fruit from, oh, actually import, import all fruits from, from fruit. Right, basically, that's the basic syntax of ES6 modules. So you just import modules like that with the import keyword. So it's a special keyword. It's not a function or anything, so it can't be overridden. So this is what Python used to do. Python does that now. You can go import something from a module, and ES6 basically decided, let's just go for what Python did ages ago, and it will work awesome for us, right? I also don't agree with that, but yeah, that's how modules are currently looking, right? If you look at them. Now, there's a part of the, in the spec, if you read the spec document, there's something that mentions a loader there. And I'm not sure if Isaac himself coined that or it was somebody else, but the loader is basically something to be like a native object for the browser, which handles loading stuff. So you can actually have a nice integration of modules and the loader. So you can just pass load and then pass the module from it to it, such as like loader, load. Let's say we have a nested module here. By the way, that's possible too, module smoothies. Now I can actually get rid of that. And then inside here, we have the smoothie logic. And then when importing that, we actually would go import fruit smoothie like that with you know, a nice-ish syntax. So you could go loader load fruit smoothie like that, and then apparently have a function here that goes that, you know, once loaded you do stuff with it, so it's all async. So I'm personally actually a big proponent that I think these things should be in the browser. I mean, it's a cluster shag as it is right now, loaders and modules and all that. I think standardizing on something would be great. So as I'm short on time anyway, there's a lot more to it. I mean, there's proxies, there's fat arrow, which is, the fat arrow is actually awesome, right? Because it's in CoffeeScript right now. And you would just think like a lot of things from CoffeeScript were brought to ES6, but not enough in my opinion. Anyway, the fat arrow is the one thing that I think is pretty excellent because, you know, it's a shorthand function form for declaring functions. You guys are probably familiar with that, but I'll just mention anyway. So you can actually have methods now that go var method gets, you know, like that. And then, yeah, so console.log that. So now method can be called like this. And this is a function, right? And you can pass arguments the same style of CoffeeScript like that. And then you go, yeah. So that's apparently going to be in ES6, but, you know, one can always hope. There's also comprehensions, which is not a CoffeeScript thing, but it's been in other languages for a while now, but it's apparently made into ES6. There's binary data, which is specific types like structures, etc., for dealing with binary data, callers, etc. It's pretty cool. And there's also proxies, which in my opinion is the very worst thing that ever happened to ES6. I think, you know, proxies are something that you declare on top of an object instance, and they will shadow the way that, say, access to some of its properties work. Clearly, these guys haven't worked enough with Rails and got screwed by it that they decided to put this thing built in the language, right? But that's okay. I'm pretty confident that they'll get there. You know, a few of these things, proxies, as I said, just recently they're changing. So I think my recommendation is if you want to get familiar with that, just check out those things. The slides are going to be online. So there's a project called Continuum, which is the in-browser console thing where you can test your ES6. And Grunt Tracer. And Grunt is actually excellent because this Grunt Tracer lets you basically develop in ES6 right now and transpile to JavaScript, and you can use ES6 in your project. Of course, that's massively cowboy, because if something changes in the spec, then you're just writing ES6 code that, you know, not going to work. You're even safer with CoffeeScript in that regard. So Google ES6 Harmony, the best resources are at the top of the list. Results, I just didn't think there's any point actually putting a list here where you guys can Google yourselves. It's pretty actually easy to find. There are not many, but there are some good presentations there that explains the progress thus far with it. And my personal pro tip, just give it another few months and start transpiling things into JavaScript. Then I think in another few months it's going to be safer. And thanks for listening. So you can rant at me on my Twitter, or better yet, rant in person today.